Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. A couple of things to update you on. Yesterday was a brilliant day for me because I got to go and check out the new Wheeler Dealers workshop for the first time alongside Mike, which was amazing. At the moment it's just a great big empty space, but for me that's a blank canvas because I now get the exciting job of kind of designing it, of working out what we want to have inside, where it's going to go, what things are going to be in there, how it's going to look and feel like a home for me, which is what it's going to be. So that's brilliant. Already I've started sketching out various designs and various bits of equipment and things that I'd like in there, parts of the design around the walls. And whilst I'd love it to look and feel a little bit like a sort of McLaren F1 facility, it's also got to have a feel of a kind of old school British garage. So we're going to try and find a way to amalgamate the two, but that's all very exciting. Can't wait for you to see that. In some very sad and tragic news, inside the Priestley household today, some flaw in the system has allowed us to run out of coffee. So I'm drinking tea, which is unusual for me, but you know, okay. So hashtag pray for Elvis. We'll get coffee back in and the world will be right again. Unfortunately, I can't do the normal track guide this week because whilst I'm sitting here in the lovely simulator, there is no program that I have that runs Istanbul Park. I don't yet have a full gaming PC to be able to upload various tracks and bolt-ons to systems that I have, so I'm using an Xbox. I just don't have it, so that's a real shame. We'll talk about the race though, of course, and in the last bit of exciting news that's coming, I've got a new rig on the way. So whilst you've seen the video where I updated all of my hardware here, the steering wheel, the pedals to the Fanatec gear, which is amazing, still loving that by the way, one of the biggest problems is that I've got my own DAS system, which isn't supposed to be there, the flex in the system. So I think I found a way to eradicate it. I've got a new rig coming. Of course, you'll see a full review when that arrives over the next couple of weeks. Stand by for that. So let's talk then about the Turkish Grand Prix, because this was a race that I loved going to for a couple of reasons. First of all, as we'll talk about more in a moment, it's an amazing track. Istanbul Park is one of Tilke's best circuits. It's incredible. Genuinely, you are going to love it if you're not familiar with it. Secondly, it was in a part of the world that I used to really enjoy going to. Istanbul is an amazing city, the only city in the world to be split across two continents. It's got an incredible culture, it's got an incredible nightlife, you can eat out in some amazing places. It was just really interesting, lovely people, and I really loved it. I loved going there. We had such amazing fun. One of the big downsides to going there when we used to go and stay in Istanbul was the journey from there to the racetrack. We had to cross over the Bosphorus, the river, and the bridge going over to where the circuit was just jam-packed, full of traffic constantly, and it would take us, and I'm not exaggerating, an hour and a half to get the few miles from our hotel to the racetrack in the mornings, which was just disastrous. It wasn't just us, it was the entire Formula One paddock was stuck in this traffic jam. I've just got off the phone to some former colleagues and friends out in Istanbul this morning who say that situation is much better. First of all, people aren't staying in Istanbul because there isn't the same appeal in this 2020 situation we're in where you can go out and enjoy the city. So that's the first thing. And secondly, because they're in some form of lockdown, there's just not as many people travelling anyway. So the traffic situation, I'm pleased to say, has alleviated itself. But let's talk about the circuit. I remember travelling in and out the circuit and security perhaps being one of the strictest, one of the highest that we'd ever been. You know, we'd be travelling along a road towards a circuit and there'd be snipers up on the hills around the racetrack with great big long weapons, you know, and I remember that being a striking feature. But the circuit, let's talk about that because the circuit is great. You're going to enjoy watching it. It should be fantastic with modern Formula One cars. It was great back in the day. I mean, the lap record around there right now, in fact, I have it somewhere. I think it was Juan Pablo Montoya. It was Juan Pablo Montoya in 2005 still holds the lap record of 124.7. That's going to get smashed because back then, you'll have all heard, I'm sure, of this famous Turn 8, which we'll come on to in a moment, this really long left-hander, which back then was a real balancing act, a challenge in trying to get a Formula One car around there flat in qualifying on low fuel and new tyres. You know, you could just about do it. Not everybody could do it, but it was a tough ask to get through there flat. Today, I think we should see everybody going absolutely flat pretty much at all times, which takes away a little bit of that challenge from that perspective, but there are plenty of other challenges too. There's a lot of gradient up and down sections. There are a number of blind corners. I've talked about a lot of that sort of stuff in my previous videos. It's give the driver a real difficulty in picking your braking points, your turning points, particularly trying to clip an apex that you can't see on the way in because you're coming over the brow of a hill. Turn 1, I think the first corner and the last corner are going to be track limits issues, as we've seen in a number of races. Turn 1, they are going to be monitoring it, and the last corner as well, coming back onto the start-finish straight, they're going to be monitoring that too, because you come out of that final corner, turn 14, onto a start-finish straight, which is a long straight. Obviously the exit is critical and everybody will want to push the limits and get the power down as early as possible. But if you step over the line, get all four wheels off the track, you will have your lap time deleted. And out of the final corner, you'll also have the following lap time deleted as well, because you're setting yourself up for the next lap, of course. So they're going to have to be very careful of that. What else have we got? Yeah, turn 1 is a sort of really sweeping left downhill over the brow, of course. As I say, we've got lots of downhills, uphills. We've got a couple of overtaking points. There's a really long flat out section. So as we come out of this long left-hander of turn 8, which is one of those corners that seems to go on and on and on and on forever, it's going to put a huge amount of stress through the right front tyre, because what you're going to be doing is leaning on that at massive speed. As I said, they're going to be flat out for a long period of time where the surface temperature builds and builds and builds and builds. And if the core temperature of the tyre isn't raised to the absolute optimum, as you start massively raising the surface temperature, if there's a big differential between surface temperature and the bulk temperature of the tyre, you will get graining on that right front. So that's maybe something to watch out for. But as you come round that turn 8, that long one, you keep going, keep pushing, pushing, pushing. Hope your tyre stays alive, keeps you the grip that you need, and you can manage to get out of there. You then go through a couple of little, almost like chicane-like corners, and then out of turn 10, you are flat for a really long section. You actually go through turn 11, which is a kink, won't even be anything in a Formula One car, so that's flat as well. So for a long, long spell through there, you really want no downforce on the car because you want low drag. But the rest of the circuit, you really need quite a large amount of downforce. It's a little bit Spa-like in that sense. It's a fast circuit, but you've got to have a reasonable chunk of downforce on there. Because when you get to the end of that straight, that between turn 10 and turn 12, that's perhaps the best overtaking opportunity for a lunge down the inside, because at the end of a long, fast straight, there's a big braking zone where the opportunity could present itself. And as a driver leading or in front, you've got to be constantly checking your mirrors. So the circuit's amazing, as I say. It is going to be tough on tyres. The circuit itself has been freshly laid with new tarmac. And that, like we've seen at some other circuits, can offer very low grip at first, can be really difficult to warm up tyres, particularly as Pirelli have brought the hardest 3 compounds in their range this week, which often is harder to get temperature into those anyway. So if you've got a very smooth, and we don't really know exactly what the macro finish is of this surface yet, but if it's very smooth, it could be very difficult to generate temperature and build that up to generate the grip. So that's again something teams are going to have to work on. And the other thing about this circuit is that whilst it's hardly been used and hardly does get used, certainly doesn't have very many race weekends, if you like, building rubber into the surface of the racetrack. This weekend there are no support races unusually. There's no F2, there's no F3, there's nothing going on other than Formula One on the track, which means that particularly over Friday, the track's going to be very green and probably take a long time, much longer than normal, to start generating the representative lap times because the grip level is going to be so low. That also is something that teams will absolutely have to factor into their strategy and their simulations overnight on Friday, in that when it comes to qualifying after they've had 2 days of running, there'll be a lot more grip presumably, than there would have been at the end of just Friday's running with only Formula One cars running around the circuit. So that's another variable they will have to factor into all of their calculations, but I'm sure that they will. It should be a fascinating race because this is a great racetrack, and as I say, overtaking opportunities, there are more than one, some more difficult than others, but I think what's most interesting about this is that it's a hard circuit on the drivers. It's an anti-clockwise circuit. That puts extra strain on the drivers' necks that they're not necessarily used to, but it's also hard on the cars and on the tyres. So much lateral force around this circuit, high speed, long duration corners that are constantly leaning on the car, leaning on the tyres, transferring the weight for prolonged periods over onto one side, which can massively potentially overload one side of the car's tyres over the other. There are also, as well as these long lateral corners, there's a lot of braking and traction zones too. So there's a real mix, and from an engineering perspective, that's the balance that they've got to find over the course of Friday. The mix between managing that front to rear traction, weight transfer rather, to allow the right level of traction and the stability under braking, whilst equally managing the weight transfer from side to side with things like anti-roll bars and spring levels through those long lateral corners that provide another challenge for the drivers too. So it's an interesting one from a driving and an engineering perspective, and I can't wait to see how it plays out. Also, just before I go, if you are interested in cars, which I know many of you are, at 9 PM for the next few weeks on the Quest channel, or it's available to stream on Discovery Plus, you'll be able to check out a show that myself, Karun Chandhok, Rory Reid, Mike Brewer-Anstead, and a number of other people, all the car people from the Discovery family, have done a show called The World's Greatest Cars. You can check it out. First one's tonight, 9 PM on Quest, and every week at 9 PM on a Thursday for the next few weeks. So check it out, and I'd love to know in the comments what your best car is. What is the world's greatest car in your opinion?